Hello and welcome. Tonight, their final say. The Prime Minister and the opposition leader in their last major interviews on the cusp of the election.
My vision for Australia is for a nation that is strong and generous.
The countdown is on.
I've come to talk to you today about what's in here.
It's a con job.
If you're having a go, you'll get a go.
What's authentic is talking to people, listening to people.
You vote for me, you'll get me.
Well, imitation's the sincerest form of flattery.
You vote for Bill Shorten and you'll get Bill Shorten.
What scares you the most about winning on Saturday night?
Winning doesn't scare me. What scares me is not fulfilling the hopes and dreams of millions of our people.
Why should Australians put their faith in somebody to do such an important job who's not there thanks to vision but thanks to accident?
For me, it's not about power. If you're in politics, you should be in it for people.
This election, Scott Morrison and Bill Shorten are presenting voters with sharply different visions for the nation's future. The Prime Minister's set the election up as an almost presidential-style choice between the two leaders, whereas the opposition leader would rather talk about his policies. Both leaders agreed to 2 interviews with 7:30 during the election campaign. We start tonight with the incumbent, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison.
I've come to talk to you today about what's in here. These are the things that I believe in.
The young Scott Morrison's transformation into ScoMo, the everyman Prime Minister, has taken an unusual route.
He was ambitious, he was pushy. I think, like a lot of politicians, he knew where he was heading for a very long period of time.
Growing up in a devout Christian family in the beachside suburb of Bronte, Scott Morrison went to Sydney Boys High. There he was a prefect and a rugby front row forward in the school's top team.
We both grew up in church families, and that's where Jenny and I met. At 16, we were going out and got married when we were 21.
Earning a science degree at the University of New South Wales, Scott Morrison worked for the Property Council of Australia before switching to government roles in tourism.
A distinctive Australian invitation.
So where the bloody hell are you?
Everyone's got a different message. This is our message and it's compelling.
He ended up getting sacked as Executive Director of Tourism Australia, but it was probably in a way the best thing that happened to him, because a few years later he ended up in Parliament.
Scott Morrison won a messy pre-selection for the safe Liberal seat of Cook in 2007.
The Shire is a great place to live and raise a family. As the federal member for Cook, I want to keep it that way.
It's one of those real sliding doors moments in Australian politics. Scott Morrison almost didn't become an MP. He got a measly 8 votes in the first round of pre-selections, and then there emerged a dirty tricks campaign against the bloke who had won that pre-selection. Eventually, he had to stand down. Scott Morrison, of course, said he had nothing to do with that campaign, and at the end of it all, Scott Morrison rose from the ashes.
My vision for Australia is for a country, a nation that is strong, prosperous and generous.
Soon, Morrison was on the opposition front bench, becoming Shadow Immigration Minister in 2009.
Their wooden boats smashed into rocks at Christmas Island early this morning.
When 48 asylum seekers died in the Christmas Island boat disaster in 2010, Morrison sparked a backlash by criticising the Gillard government's decision to pay for families to attend the funerals.
Any other Australian who wanted to attend a funeral for someone who died in tragic circumstances would have to put their hand in their own pocket.
It was a very callous decision on his part, and he was forced to backtrack and apologise. So I think he learnt a lesson from that.
The detection, interception and transfer would be led by Border Protection Command.
When Tony Abbott's government was elected in 2013, the now Immigration Minister launched Operation Sovereign Borders.
Those seeking to come on boats will not be getting what they have come for.
A cloak of secrecy descended over boat arrivals and turnbacks.
Again, I'm not going to go into on-water operations.
It was his job to give out as little information as possible because he wanted the policy to succeed, and it succeeded.
Well, When Malcolm Turnbull became Prime Minister in 2015, Scott Morrison voted in support of Tony Abbott, but was accused of not asking his allies to follow his lead.
Do you understand now that I think you misled me and my listeners on Monday?
Well, I didn't, Ray.
Well, there's a Bible there. Do you want to put your right hand on it and swear on that Bible?
I don't have one, mate. And there's not one here. And I don't see what my faith's got to do with it, Ray. We're mates, mate, but that does step over the line.
As Turnbull's treasurer, Scott Morrison initially resisted calls for a banking royal commission and abstained from voting on same-sex marriage. And he's remembered for coming to Parliament with a lump of coal.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. Affordable energy is what Australian businesses need to remain competitive.
That would have played very well for him in certain parts of the country that the Liberal Party needed to win back.
When Peter Dutton moved against Turnbull last year, Scott Morrison rebuffed suggestions he had ambitions of his own.
Me? This is my leader.
There you go.
And I'm ambitious for him.
Yeah, good on you. Thanks, ScoMo.
But 48 hours later, Scott Morrison had come through the middle and taken the top job for himself.
This new Liberal national team is a next generation team.
In the 9 months since, Scott Morrison's worked the nation like he works a room, confident he's convincing everyone that he's an everyman too.
I'm just good old ScoMo, mate. Shark supporter.
Inviting the public to see more of his life, including allowing a camera to film him celebrate his evangelical faith.
If he wins, he'll be a hero. He'll be a modern-day Liberal hero because he will have won an election that everybody thought was unwinnable. So that would be a huge feat for him to pull off.
Prime Minister, welcome back to 7:30.
Thanks, Lee. Good to be here again.
In this campaign, as we've just seen, you've cultivated the image of ScoMo, the somewhat daggy dad and bloke next door. But are voters really to believe that somebody who, after a brutal pre-selection, rose from backbencher to PM in just 11 years, is not a highly ambitious and strategic political player?
What people have seen of me, Lee, is what I'm like each and every day with my family, with my friends, in my community. I'm at ease with people because I like people. And that's why I went into politics. In my family, it's always been about how you serve, not what you accumulate. And I've always seen the opportunity to serve in this role. My brother, he's a paramedic. My father was a policeman. We've all chosen different ways to serve, but service is what we're about.
But let's be square with voters. You are an ambitious guy.
Well, Lee, anyone who enters into politics is ambitious to serve. And for me, it's not about power. It's not about any of these things, as I said at the press club today. If you're in politics, you should be in it for people. That's what motivates me and inspires me every day. Young people buying their first home, older Australians who've saved for their retirement and being able to enjoy it independently and without having their savings taken away from them is what Labor's proposing. This is what inspires me.
You've always maintained that you're something of the accidental PM and that you never actively sought the job. Why should Australians put their faith in somebody to do such an important job who, by his own admission, is not there thanks to vision but thanks to accident?
No, I'm there because, Lee, I've always been there to serve. And when my party was looking for someone to serve, when we fell into the events of last year, then I always answer that call. Someone had to step up, and I did. But I always acted in a way that was supportive of the Prime Minister. And but when that became a position that was no longer tenable, then someone had to step up, Lee. And I'm always someone who will step up to serve my country.
You mentioned just a moment ago your policy to help first home buyers, which is the key policy you've announced since you were last on 7:30. But you yourself have said during the campaign that any time a subsidy is applied to something, it drives prices up. By your own logic, won't this policy make houses cost more?
It's not a subsidy, Lee. What it is a guarantor on the deposit between 5 and 20%. Now, if you've got to get 20%, currently you can go out and buy lender's mortgage insurance if you're on a higher income. But what this is about is targeting that support to people who are on low to middle incomes, up to $125,000 for an individual, $200,000 for a couple if they're both first home buyers.
But it is a government guarantee. How does it not distort the market?
Well, what I believe this will do is firm the market. You're talking about 10,000 people. That's the estimate of those who will take up the scheme. You've got over 110,000 people buying a first home every year, and that's about 13% of the entire residential property market. So I don't think we're talking about large numbers of people that have that sort of distorting impact. But I'll tell you what it won't do. It won't drop the price. And that's what Labor's housing tax will do.
You haven't modelled that policy, you haven't costed it, it hasn't been to Cabinet. How do you know any of that stuff?
Because I'm an economist and I've had a lot of experience working in the property industry over most of my life, Lee. It's a common sense proposition. What this will do is will firm a market. Having served as a treasurer, I'm quite familiar with the dynamics of property markets, particularly residential property markets, and the impact they can have on broader consumer confidence. They're the things you need to know as a treasurer, Lee, and that's why I'm across that detail and understand that we can well target and calibrate this measure in the way that we have.
Well, this housing policy is a direct government intervention in the market. Your climate change policy is a direct government intervention. When did the Liberal Party give up belief in the free market?
I don't see things in those sort of such terms, Lee. I see government as a practical engagement based on your beliefs in values about helping Australians achieve their goals.
But if you're a voter, who believes in the free market,
Robert Menzies had a similar scheme. Robert Menzies had a similar scheme, Lee, and he founded our party because he understood that homes, not just material, was central to the Australian vision. And whether it's someone buying their own home. And the other thing I did, Lee, is I gave a tax cut to people for their first home deposits. That was in my 17-18 budget. Labor's going to reverse that. So right now, you can actually save for your first home through your superannuation scheme, which means you pay lower tax on what you're sacrificing from your salary and the earnings on that saving. Labor's going to reverse that. That means you're going to pay higher taxes on your first home deposit savings, and it's $373 million over the next 4 years in higher taxes.
Looking at your personal record in the Parliament, why did you abstain from the vote on same-sex marriage?
I always said I wouldn't stand in the way of that if that was the will of the Australian people, and I didn't. What we did as a government is we put in place a process that would enable us to resolve this issue.
But why did you abstain from the vote?
Because I said I wouldn't stand in the way of it, Lee, and I've acted consistent with the position I've taken on that issue over a very long period of time.
So
what I wanted
sorry, can you just clarify? I don't understand what you mean by...
I'm trying to clarify it, Lee.
I just don't understand what you mean by I didn't want to stand in the way, so therefore you had to abstain.
Lee, what I'm saying is this issue needed to be resolved. It was resolved almost 2 years ago. I'm pleased it was. I was part of the process of the government that ensured that we could get a very clear statement from the Australian people about whether they wanted this change. Remember, the previous Labor government, previous Labor Prime Minister actually voted against this change. What we did was to take the Australian people with us. And when that was done, my view was, if that's the will of the Australian people, then I'm pleased to allow that to occur, and I did not stand in the way.
But as the member for a group of local Australian people, you didn't then go in there and vote yes?
No, I didn't. I acted consistent with the views I've held in the past and what I'd articulated up until that time. And I said I would not stand in the way of it, and I didn't. And I'm very pleased it's now resolved, because it's now resolved, Lee, in a way that we brought the country together on, not as a point of conflict. And I'm so pleased now that that is not an issue that's before this election at all, nor should it be. What matters now is the strength of our economy in the future to pay for things like the NDIS and youth mental health challenges and combating youth suicide, which are all part of my plan.
Viewers will be aware that your faith has become part of this campaign. You've accused Labor of being grubby about it. You did invite cameras into your church at Easter to take pictures of you worshipping. You've spoken about the importance of your faith to who you are. Aren't you the one who's made your faith part of your pitch to voters?
Well, let me correct you on one thing, Lee. The request to come into my church on Easter Sunday was made to our pastor, Pastor Brad Bonham. That's who the request was made to. Only the pastor decides where the cameras can come into my church.
Did it get run past you, though?
He asked me if I had any objections, and I said no, but he's the one who decides. He was the one who was asked,
sure,
and he was the one who gave that permission.
I stand corrected, but clearly you were comfortable, though, with it.
Well, I was, Lee, because it's who I am. 2 days before, I'd been at a Good Friday service at a Maronite church in Parramatta, and so I don't see, frankly, what the issue is different between cameras being in a Pentecostal church and one being in a Maronite church. I was in both. I was participating in the other service doing a reading, as was Tony Burke, by the way. So it is part of who I am, Lee, and I'm very open about that. And I've always been, because I think people should know who you are.
Well,
and I've never sought to hide who I am and what I'm about and what drives me. But the thing that drives me at this election is the Australian people, because I want to realise their aspirations.
Can I ask, though, you say you're very open about it, and I want to be respectful about this. Fewer than 2% of Australians are Pentecostals, and so they might be unfamiliar with what you actually believe. So can I ask you to explain what exactly do you believe about God?
Well, Lee, to be fair, I'm not running for Pope. I'm running for Prime Minister. Theological questions are not ones that are actually, I think, germane to the political debate in this country.
No, but you just made the point that you're trying to help voters understand who you are.
I'm just saying my faith, which teaches me to love others, and that God loves everybody, and that we should be agents for his love in this world, is what I've always believed. And that's what my church community does, and every church community I've been part of, including my parents who served in their local youth organisations for 45 years. Every Thursday and Friday school night, my parents were there running Boys and Girls Brigade for young people in our community. They taught me a life of faith and service. And that's what my faith means to me. It means service and caring for others.
Let's turn to a subject that's barely been raised during the election campaign, and that's foreign policy. How do you view China's signature foreign policy, its Belt and Road initiative to expand its political and economic influence throughout the world?
Well, that's China's initiative, and it doesn't require Australia to endorse that initiative. That is a policy pursued by the Chinese government, and that's their sovereign choice to do so.
No, but we have our own foreign policy, and therefore we respond to other countries' foreign policy. I'm asking how you view it.
And we have a neutral position on that. We don't sign up to it. We don't participate in it. That's the position of the Australian government. There are individual Australian companies, though, who do participate in that, and we seek to facilitate that as well and have no issues with that. It's good for Australian companies. It's good for Australian jobs. Chinese growth and its prosperity and its economy is a good thing for Australia. I welcome it. I advocate it. I celebrate it. And I think the 1.2 million of Australians with Chinese heritage have deep connections with China, and that provides another dimension to our relationship, which I think is very advantageous for Australia.
The US has traditionally been Australia's closest ally. How comfortable do you think that Australians would be following the US into any kind of international military action with Donald Trump as Commander-in-Chief?
Well, Australia has been with the United States in every major conflict. For 100 years. We're just celebrating that partnership and that relationship most recently. I think it's one of Ambassador Hockey's real great achievements as ambassador to draw attention to that. And that's why we enjoy, I think, such a close relationship. But all of those issues are always considered on their merits at the time in Australia's national interests, independent of anything other than what's best for Australia.
But my point is, how many Australians would have trust and faith in the current US Commander-in-Chief?
Well, what we would do in any situation that would require that question to be put to us, and I've sat around the national security table now for 5 years and now chair it, and we've been in a position where we've considered many requests that have come from the United States, and on each occasion we have considered it in the interests of Australia, what's best for our interests and how we pursue those interests in partnership with our allies, and what's best for our region and how we pursue our interests in our region.
The ABC's confirmed that in a deal with the US, Australia accepted 2 accused Rwandan murderers in return for the US taking asylum seekers from Nauru and Manus Island. Where are those 2 men now?
Well, I can confirm, Lee, that the 2 individuals that have been subject of this reporting were subject to the security and character assessments and the work that must be done in terms of assessing whether there are any war crimes that are associated with persons who are coming as a refugee. And that security process cleared those individuals.
And where are they now?
They're in Australia, and they were cleared of those particular matters in terms of Australia's assessment of those particular matters, and I can confirm that.
The opposition leader Bill Shorten and some of his ministers have been critical of News Corp's coverage of the election. How would you describe your relationship with Rupert and Lachlan Murdoch?
Well, I know both gentlemen, and probably know Lachlan a little better because he's about closer to my age, and we both have young families, and that's the nature of any sort of personal discussion we often have, which isn't too often. No, I wouldn't say we do. We might see each other once a year or something like that. They run a very large organisation, and I seek to have relationships as Prime Minister with all those who have an interest in Australia.
If we end up with a hung parliament on Saturday night, how will you proceed?
Well, I think if that's the situation that presents, I think the first point would be that Mr Shorten's campaign to change the direction of Australia would not have succeeded If he's unable to form a majority in the House of Representatives, then the suggestion that something should change would not have been endorsed by the Australian public. And in that circumstance, I think there are strong cases to be made about continuing the incumbency of a government that has set out a direction. It's Bill Shorten who's saying the government should change.
And
For that to occur, he would need to have a majority of members in the House of Representatives to confirm that that is indeed what the Australian people wanted.
So that's obviously the case you'd be making to any independents who were in the House of Reps.
I think it's a fair... Sorry?
Would you be prepared to... are you prepared to negotiate with anyone who's elected there?
Well, I couldn't see us negotiating with people like the Greens. No, I couldn't see that because they are so at odds with what the Liberal Party stands for. I mean, we don't support death taxes, we don't support scuttling the US alliance, we don't support any of those programs, and I couldn't see that progressing. But look, we don't know what the composition of the parliament would be, so we'd have to assess that at the time. In
the event of a defeat, will you seek to carry on as Liberal leader?
I'm only interested in what is happening on Saturday and seeking a majority government. And this is the reason, Lee. I've been asked this question a few times now. My future is not the point here. Australians' future is the point here. What they want for themselves, that's my vision for them, to realise their aspirations. So it's about them. It's not about individual politicians. It's about their future. And on Saturday, they can vote to stop Labor's high taxes. They can vote to support me backing in Australians. I'm backing them and I'm asking them to back me on Saturday.
Scott Morrison, thank you very much for your availability to 7:30 during the campaign.
Thanks very much, Lee. Always a pleasure.
It's my very sad duty to break the news this evening that the former Australian Prime Minister Bob Hawke has died, aged 89. His wife Blanche Delperge issued a statement a short time ago. Mr Hawke was Australia's 23rd Prime Minister. It's very difficult to overstate what a giant he is of the Labor Party and of the Labor movement. He was Prime Minister from 1983 to 1981. Along with his Treasurer Paul Keating, they introduced an enormous series of political and economic reforms which paved the way for the modern Australia in which we all live today. Mr Hawke, with the assistance of his Labor team, began Medicare in 1984. He ushered in a series of improvements in productivity in the Australian workplace thanks to a series of accords between businesses and unions. He floated the Australian dollar. He introduced more foreign competition into the Australian banking sector. He dismantled tariffs, and they're just a few of Bob Hawke's achievements. Shortly, we will play you an obituary of Bob Hawke, but as Bob Hawke knows more than anybody, politics has to go on. And we are in the middle of an election campaign, and so firstly, we will bring you our interview with Bill Shorten as planned in the interests of fairness and balance. The interview with Mr Shorten was recorded before news broke that Bob Hawke had died. Bill Shorten, as you might expect, has a very different background to Scott Morrison. Associates say he's held an ambition to be Prime Minister since his youth, and for pretty much the entire time since the last election, opinion polls have had him set to achieve that dream.
From faceless man to the face of Labor, Bill Shorten's politics and ambition were evident even at school. At Xavier College in Melbourne, he is remembered as a keen debater, quiet and smart.
I think there's always been a sense that Bill Shorten wanted to be Prime Minister one day. I think there's always been talk around Bill Shorten's ambitions and around his talents.
Studying law at Monash University, Bill Shorten was a young Labor man in a hurry, active in student politics, before becoming an organiser with the Australian Workers' Union.
It's real frontline shock troop stuff.
I prepared a letter of demand.
We're union builders. We go in first and we try and set up the union's credibility in that workplace, and then from there others take over.
Is it possible to have a chat later on? Certainly. After shift change?
Bill Shorten is a creature of the trade union movement. He was only in his 20s, but he was marked out as someone with a very bright future.
All of a sudden you're getting a $10 pay rise.
Bill Shorten rose rapidly through union ranks and married Deborah Beale a year before becoming National Secretary of the AWU in 2001.
Let me tell you, the countdown is on, and if you won't give it to us, well, we'll come and take it.
He marketed himself at the time as someone who not only was on the side of the workers, but who also knew how to work with business.
When the gaze of the nation turned to the plight of 2 miners trapped by the Beaconsfield mine collapse in 2006, Bill Shorten was front and centre.
One man has died and 2 other men are missing. This is a massive tragedy.
Beaconsfield was the making of Bill Shorten. Up to that point, there had been talk in Labor circles, people had heard of him, but that was the time when he emerged onto the national stage.
Shorten was elected in 2007 as part of Kevin Rudd's government.
I'm inexpressibly proud to be here as part of this new, fresh and hopeful Rudd government.
In 2008, Shorten remarried to Quentin Bryce's daughter, Chloe, renouncing Catholicism to become an Anglican. 2 years later, he was playing a pivotal role in the downfall of Kevin Rudd.
Shorten's role in Kevin Rudd's demise was central. There was a lot of footage of Shorten himself out on the town, on his mobile, corralling the numbers.
A number of factional leaders within the Labor Party no longer support my leadership.
Bill Shorten became a key supporter of Julia Gillard.
So I haven't seen what she said, but let me say I support what it is that she said.
3 years on, with a federal election looming, Bill Shorten was working the numbers again to bring down Gillard and reinstall Rudd.
Proud here this evening.
All of these issues need to be resolved tonight.
The future of this nation and the Labor Party is at stake here. Therefore, I shall be supporting Kevin Rudd tonight.
I don't think people have forgiven him for that, because that introduced something into Australian politics that we hadn't really seen before, and it was not welcome.
When Labor lost the 2013 election, Shorten was elected leader.
Today is a brand new day for the Australian Labor Party.
Bill Shorten soon faced a grilling at the Abbott government's Royal Commission into trade unions.
I completely disagree with what you've just said then.
There were no findings against Shorten, but the Commission questioned his credibility as a witness. As the coalition indulged in its own Game of Thrones, Shorten's leadership of Labor strengthened. But public popularity has eluded him.
Nice to meet you, Bill Shorten.
His greatest accomplishment, you would have to say, is that he kept the Labor Party united in opposition in all those years, in spite of everything that happened and in spite of his own role in destroying 2 prime ministers.
It's pretty clear at this point that the public hasn't warmed to Bill Shorten, and Bill's response to that has been to say, OK, you might not know me, you might not like me, but here are those policies.
They're going to reverse the cuts to the New South Wales.
A warmer Bill Shorten was on display last week when responding to newspaper accounts of his mother's life.
Other things. Do you know that my mum wrote the book on education and law in Australia? Brilliant. She's brilliant.
I think Bill Shorten's career will be over if he doesn't win this election. This is his second shot at it. I doubt very much that he would get a third go at it.
Cheers. Thanks very much.
Mr. Shorten, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Do you think the public has trouble reconciling the Bill Shorten that we just saw in that story, the bloke doing the numbers and so forth, with the collegiate team player that's the image you've sought to portray in the election campaign?
Well, I noticed in the interview that you had Nikki Sava, who's a Conservative commentator, getting 5 cracks at me. She's not going to vote for Labor, so I put her views to one side.
Sean
Let's go to the heart of the... No, I appreciate it.
But...
Let's appreciate... Well, used to be. Let's go to the heart of the matter. Wherever I go in Australia, Australians are telling me they want to vote for change. I'm getting a great reception. We're getting a great reception because my United team, which I've helped build over the last 6 years, has learned lessons, and we're going to take real action on climate change. We're going to tackle the problem of low wages growth. We're going to tackle the issue of cost of living for working mums. So wherever I go, I'm finding a pretty good reaction.
Labor's promising a lot of new spending, and I want to be crystal clear for voters. Is all that spending contingent on you getting your savings reforms through the Senate?
Well, first of all, you'd have seen that Labor's presented the most detailed policy platform that an opposition's presented in many, many elections. And we've got a great set of books. And what we're doing is we are proposing tax reforms. I'm not only confident that we'll get our reforms through the Senate, but we've also allocated within our much better set of books for the nation a very healthy surplus. So a particular measure doesn't sink or swim our policy proposals because we've done the homework.
So you'll keep the spending proposals but have a lower surplus, if I understand what you just said correctly?
No, what I said is we're going to fight to get our proposals through the Senate. But of course your question presupposes that we win on Saturday, and that's my focus. And the case which we put to Australians, which I put today in Blacktown, is this economy is not working in the interests of working middle-class people, and we've had a very chaotic and divided government.
But I just want to be completely upfront with Australian voters about whether you will drop any of the promises you've made, the spending promises you've made, if you can't get your reform package through the Senate. And I just want to be clear that I'm understanding correctly that what you're saying is you'll keep those spending promises, but you'll pull the money from the surplus if you have to.
No, what you asked me earlier was did our policies to help make the lives of Australians better depend upon getting every Senate reform through. The reality is we have a big buffer, a very big buffer. But let's go to the heart of the matter. What you're raising is the spectre of a right-wing Senate, Palmer and One Nation, who survive off Liberal preferences, being able to block our measures in the Senate. If we get elected on Saturday, if our program for real change, climate change and the rest, cost of living measures like childcare, pension and dental, what we'll be able to do is claim a mandate. Now, mandate's a term used a lot by political commentators, but I think in this case, the fact that we've been so upfront with the people of Australia, I mean, we've got a plan for change to take Australia into the 2020s. All the government's got is a scare campaign.
But if it's not a decisive victory, is it really a mandate?
Well, first of all, we've put forward our policies. Let's see how we go on Saturday. I'm feeling optimistic, and I think the reception which I've seen our ideas receive around Australia means that I think the time is right for a change. People, I feel shortchanged by the current government, who haven't really put forward any policies at all, and they've only put forward their costings today. We've got a costed plan, but it's about the trifecta of politics. Well, better tax cuts for 10 million people, tick. Reversing the cuts to schools and hospitals, tick. And a better surplus. And that is a plan with a mandate.
You say they've not put forward any policy. They did actually put forward a policy on the weekend, the first home buyers policy, which Labor immediately adopted. Were you aware at the time that it hadn't been modelled by Treasury?
Well, first of all, when you're defending the government saying they put forward a policy, their policy is for 10,000 people. Hundreds of thousands of houses get bought and sold every year.
But were you aware it hadn't been modelled by Treasury?
But I'm just coming to the point where you assert the government has a policy. This is a modest policy. And so to that extent, we had a good look at it. We can fit it in the garage of our ideas about housing reform. There's plenty of space. If the government hasn't done all the homework, then if we get elected, we'll make sure that the idea can stack up.
But you've said you're going to adopt it, though, so are you adopting it or not? Now you're saying let's check if it stacks up.
No. What I've said is that we have got the capacity within our broader housing policies for renters, for first home buyers, to be able to take this idea and implement it. What we'll do, if we get elected, is make the idea work. I mean, you're right. This feeble attempt from the government, as you could tell, or no, maybe you're not saying it, but most experts are saying this government's rushing around for a single positive idea in this election, and it looked like, this was a bit of an afterthought from a government who's let first home buyers languish for the last 6 years.
Are you hoping that your suite of policies will drive down housing prices in Australia?
No, our policies are not about driving prices in a particular direction. They're about levelling the playing field for first home buyers, one. Because it isn't really fair, is it, Lee, that a first home buyer couple goes along on a Saturday to an auction and they're competing against a property investor who's getting a government subsidy to make a loss. And to be very clear, because of the shameless scare campaign run by, some of the real estate agents keeping their business models intact, relying on government subsidies, none of our changes on negative gearing are retrospective. So, one, we're going to help home buyers in the future, first home buyers. Two, Our changes are not retrospective. We're reforming negative gearing. And 3, there's a whole group of people who this government never really talks about. It's the people who can't afford to buy their own home. And we've got measures to assist them with social housing too.
Let's turn to a subject that's barely been raised during the election campaign, which is foreign policy. How do you view the main plank of China's foreign policy, which is the Belt and Road policy to expand its influence politically and economically throughout the region?
Well, that's China's foreign policy, it's not ours. We start from the position that our security alliance with the United States is our paramount friendship. But I did notice that the current government and the current Prime Minister said that we don't have to choose between our friends, meaning America, and our customers, meaning China.
No, but I'm not asking about that.
No,
I'm asking about the
that.
Labor Party in government. You say it's China's
asking.
foreign policy. I'm asking Labor's foreign policy. How would you view that activity?
Sorry, I answered that in the first sentence. I said we'll have our own foreign policy, not China's. And what I'm doing
how will
now,
you respond to that?
That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you the context of our response, because the great rivalry which you're alluding to is the one between China and the United States. And the question is, how does a nation like Australia, with our traditional ongoing ties of security, work with China? And then what I was getting to the point about was this. We need to weigh up and look at China and North Asia and other Asian economies and societies, not just through the prism of either threat or customer. I think we need to be more sophisticated. So in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative, we will not sign up to anything which in any way compromises Australia's national independence or our foreign policy objectives.
On that same point, I guess, looking at it from the other way, the US has traditionally been Australia's closest ally. Given Donald Trump's track record of lies and exaggeration, how will you deal with him on a leader-to-leader basis?
Well, you can make those judgments about the US president.
I think they're a matter of fact, actually.
Sure, that's what you say. But my point is this. I'm running for Prime Minister, not compere of the 7:30 report. So the way I will do it is professionally. Again, I will make sure we pursue Australia's foreign policy with an Australian accent, with our interests.
But as I say, how will you deal with somebody, though, who has a track record of...
It's not for me to pick up who the American people pick, just like it's not for the Americans or any other country to decide who our leader is.
No, but he is who he is. So how will you deal with him? How will you negotiate with him?
Professionally and pragmatically.
But is he going to be a trustworthy partner?
America has been a close ally of ours. What people expect from their Prime Minister, in my opinion, is that I behave professionally, that I prepare, and I work out what Australia's long-term interests are. I've got 30 years of negotiation. Who the other team send as their negotiator isn't for me to pick. What I've got to do is define our interests and work out how I achieve our interests. And that's something I've been doing for 30 years.
You and some of your team have been critical of News Limited's coverage of the federal election and of Labor during the campaign. How influential do you think newspapers are in 2019? And is media diversity in Australia something that you would look at in government?
I do support greater media diversity, and I've become concerned about the shrinking number of operators in our media market, and I've said that. But I also recognise that you've got the new platforms which make it harder for traditional media to compete with. And there's a third issue. It's properly funding the ABC. Now, I don't expect you to comment on whether or not you agree with our policies, but I am disturbed that this government's cut $83.7 million from the ABC. We've said we'll put all of that back in. And what's more is because Labor believes in a strong national independent public broadcaster, we're putting in more money for drama, for music, for comedy, so that we have more ABC, not less.
The Prime Minister's religious beliefs have been a matter of some focus in this election. What do you say to the suggestion that you've sought to politicise his faith by insinuating, for example, that he's suggested gay people are going to hell when he didn't say that?
No, that's not what happened. Let's be very clear. The Prime Minister was asked a question a couple of times, which he didn't answer. Are gay people going to hell? I've not at any stage spoken about his religion.
But as highlighting that... Sorry, can I just want to get to the point. He viewed the fact that you raised it as politicising his faith.
Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? But that's not what happened. The reality is I didn't ask him not to answer that question. I do respect the right to religious freedom. I do respect freedom of speech. But I also respect that just as religion's part of someone's identity, so is their sexuality. I make no judgment about people who have no faith or practice whatever faith. If you're Prime Minister, though, I truly believe that we've got to create an inclusive society where people are able to express their identity within the realms of the law without any persecution. What happened is that I simply thought a Prime Minister should make it clear that they don't think that gay people are going to go to hell.
On the point about inclusion and the right to religious freedom, say if in office Labor did strengthen Australia's anti-discrimination laws, for example, to protect LGBTI kids in religious schools, how will that not limit the rights of Christian schools to teach their fundamental beliefs?
Well, I think using exemptions to the anti-discrimination legislation is a lazy form of employing people and treating people. I think that we are capable, though, of creating reform which allows schools to teach the faith that they believe in according to the values which they hold. I don't think this problem is actually too hard. And I certainly accept that if we're to make sure we strengthen protections against people because of their sexual identity being discriminated against, at the same time we've got to respect the right of schools, for example, religious schools, to teach the faith they believe in. I'll be able to work on that. The Law Reform Commission's looking at that. I've met with both sides of the debate. What I will bring to the job is a view that we're all in this together. I don't think schools want to treat little kids badly, but I also don't think that we should be relying on outmoded forms of exemptions to discrimination law. What I'll bring to Australia in 2019 is a modern way of thinking which respects faith, but also respects people's identity in other ways.
If you lose on Saturday night, is it the end of your political career?
That's about the fourth time you've used the hypothetical. If this happens, if that happens, I'll tell you what.
You must have given it some thought, Mr. Shorten.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm a very focused person. I'm focused on getting as many votes as possible on Saturday. We can have that conversation after 6 p.m. But what concerns me more than what happens to me is what happens to this country. We've got to take real action on climate. It's not right that inequality is growing in this country. It's not right that wages are stagnating. It's not right that pensioners are waiting to can't afford to get dental care. It's not right that people who are diagnosed with cancer in the fight of their life aren't getting the help. The system's not free. So for me, it's not about me. My team's united, and I can promise Australians that we won't see the chaos of the last 6 years, and we've proven that we've learned our lesson because of our unity of the last 6 years.
It's not about you, as you say, but nonetheless, for any human being, when they're on the cusp of potentially being the Prime Minister, that is a very big thing.
Yes,
what
it is.
scares you the most about winning on Saturday night?
Winning doesn't scare me. What scares me is not fulfilling the hopes and dreams of millions of our people. What scares me is when parents go to work and they have one of their two salaries chewed up by childcare. What scares me is that you might die of cancer because you're poor. What scares me is that black kids in this country are more likely to go to jail than university. What scares me is you might have women who are the victims of family violence who have to stay in an abusive relationship because this country hasn't worked out where they can stay.
Bill Shorten, you agreed to do 2 interviews during the campaign. You've honoured that. We very much appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you very much, Lee. Have a lovely evening.
And just to reiterate, that interview with Bill Shorten was recorded before the breaking news this evening of the death of the former Australian Prime Minister Bob Hawke. Since then, Mr Shorten has released a statement. I'll just read a little bit of it to you. He says, "The Australian people loved Bob Hawke because they knew Bob loved them. This was true to the very end. With his passing, the Labor movement salutes our greatest son. The Labor Party gives thanks for the life of our longest-serving Prime Minister, and Australians everywhere remember and honour a man who gave so much to the country and people he cared for so deeply." Mr Shorten last paid a visit to Mr Hawke on Monday the 6th of May, and he said, "Bob knew what he meant to Australia. He knew what he had achieved for our country. He knew he was loved right to the end." Louise Milligan looks back at the life of a true Australian statesman.
I prefer to deal directly with the Australian people, and it's been a successful relationship.
Thanks for all your support.
Oh, he's a nice man. I mean, he really is.
G'day. 1983 went much as I'd planned it. I dominated it.
Any boss who sacks anyone for not turning up today is a bum. On your marks. Get set.
How much of that description that I gave there, which is from the National Times, is true? We'll take it. Swears like a trooper?
Oh, yeah?
This one I'm not quite sure about. Performs like a playboy?
I have my moments.
He was a golden character in many ways. You know, he was a one-off, he's an original, but he always had as a genuine belief in the goodness of the Australian people and a genuine determination to make things better for them.
I'll buy you a drink, Gazza.
Hooray for Bob Hawke! Hooray!
The Hawke leadership showed that if you've got a leader seen as being above class, above party, a consensus leader, the Labor Party can be a majority party.
Familiar scenes as excited schoolchildren milled around the Prime Minister. Some of them held...
Born Robert James Lee Hawke, but Australia knew him as Bob. Bob Hawke's life started off in a tiny speck on the South Australian map called Bordertown. Born to Congregationalist minister Clem and his schoolteacher wife Ellie.
My mother had a fanatical commitment to education.
Ellie Hawke felt in her every bone that her son was destined for greatness, that he would one day be Prime Minister.
Well, I think that Mum seemed to have had some view about it. You know, when I was born, I don't know, she said there was something special, but that's a bit embarrassing to talk about.
Mother Hawke was to be right on the money. Her bright little spark became a talented pupil. The Rhodes Scholar took economics at Oxford. On his return, he went to the Australian Council of Trade Unions, where he fought for higher wages at the Conciliation and Arbitration Commission.
When you're president of the ACTU, not even a seriously rigged back can prevent the paperwork piling up or stop the phone calls coming.
Where he was extraordinarily popular.
Well, he sort of turned leading the ACTU into a species of show business. There was an industrial dispute, there was a moment of tension before he, as president of the ACTU, came in. He'd arrive on the scene, he'd bring the two sides together, he'd produce what seemed a well-crafted compromise.
It was at this point that his pledge of temperance to his mother Ellie went thoroughly out the window. Bob Hawke, the ACTU president, was a dedicated drinker.
He probably used alcohol more than any public figure, any leader in our history.
I tend, I think, occasionally to take too much refuge in having a drink.
He was drunk a lot of the time. He obviously used alcohol as a way of breaking down barriers, of gaining quick intimacy, steering people towards some emotion-laden compromise.
Mr Hawke, in a recent newspaper article, you said that you believed that you had the makings of a Prime Minister.
He gave up the grog and in 1980 became a member for the safe Victorian federal seat of Wills.
Just said to myself, if you're going to become Prime Minister of this country, you can't afford ever to be in a position where you can make a fool of yourself or of your country. And I never had a drop by the whole period I was in Parliament.
The prime ministerial ambitions took 3 years to be realised. Liberal Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser was on the nose, but there were questions about Labor opposition leader Bill Hayden's ability to wrest government from him. The hugely popular Hawke was the obvious alternative. The deal was done in January 1983 in Brisbane.
Even as the party's parliamentary executive arrived for today's meeting here in Brisbane, Mr Hayden's fate had been sealed. He'd been approached after private meetings overnight and reluctantly advised to stand aside.
I believe that a drover's dog could lead the Labor Party to victory, the way the country is and the way the opinion polls are showing up for the Labor Party.
Bill Hayden has done a remarkably courageous thing.
Malcolm Fraser, who was very nervous of the possibility of facing Hawke instead of Hayden, decided to go to Yarralumla and call an election, thinking he better call it quickly while he still got Hayden. However, as he was in the process of doing that, we had already instated Bob.
Australia's most dramatic day in politics since November the 11th, 1975.
So it was I think, the greatest political coincidence in Australian political history, the way that worked. People were so excited, and it was like that from then on. That campaign was remarkable.
Ms Fraser, did you have any second thoughts this afternoon when you found out that you would like to face Mr Hawke and not Mr Hayden?
On the contrary, I had a little more relish. It'll be the first election in which two Labor leaders have been knocked off in one go.
That was not to be. Bob Hawke won in a landslide.
Looking down at the crowd, which is down below here at the tally room in Canberra, waving.
Labor needs, to pull in the middle-class voters, Labor needs a nimble-footed leader who can straddle the divisions and get, fundamentally, get middle-class people to record a vote for a trade union, working-class-based party. And Hawke was preeminently good at that.
In partnership with his brash treasurer, Hawke set about transforming the Australian economy through the historic wage accord between big business and unions.
Mr Hawke was elected on a promise of bringing Australians together. Well, after just 5 weeks, there they are.
The captains of industry, the union bosses, the politicians.
When the phone started ringing in dealing rooms this morning, trading was frenetic.
Floating the Australian dollar and tariff cuts.
The idea of the Workers' Party, the trade union-based party, a Labor or Social Democratic Party, opening the economy up to market-based reforms, that was the fusion that was special about Bob Hawke's leadership and his partnership with Keating.
He wanted to be Prime Minister, but he wanted to be Prime Minister for a purpose. And because he went there for a purpose, he's prepared to take risks. Politicians these days are not big risk takers. He was a very big risk taker.
There were also huge social policy shifts, like embracing environmentalism, going to the High Court to save the Franklin Dam.
My government will honour the promises that we have made in respect to Tasmania.
They were very heady years for environmentalism, and Bob Hawke was the captain of the ship.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister of Australia.
In the foreign policy area, he gave a new definition to Australian nationalism. He made us a major player on the global stage. As we globalised, as we took advantage of the opportunities that were there for us to compete internationally, we became a different country.
He was the master of the media opportunity, embracing television like no other before him.
I can get nicked now, really. And if I want to appear coatless talking to Yarn Event, I will.
The next guest I've got is no stranger to us all. It's our Prime Minister, Mr Bob Hawke. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Thank you.
Bob had the habits of an ordinary Australian bloke. He liked the races. He had liked to drink.
He makes us all look well dressed.
Hawke-era Defence Minister Kim Beazley says the PM was always across his cabinet submissions, but brought a common touch to his understanding of them.
Bob would say, you know, it's really good, it's very interesting, I've read through this submission. But, you know, I was at the races the other day and Bill Smith came up to me and he said this about your issue. Now, Bill's got a point.
He did at times have a famously fiery temper.
I made that statement that I will not be making a challenge, and I adhere to that statement. And now, if you want to do your speculation, do it without me. I've made my position clear. But you could kill it stone dead here and now by saying, no, come on, now grab hold of yourself. I've made it quite clear. I've said it 3 times. Now, you are just being a bloody pest.
Mr Hawke, could I ask you whether you feel a little embarrassed tonight at the blood that's on your hands?
You're not improving, are you? I thought you'd make a better start to the year than that. It's a ridiculous question. You know it's ridiculous. I have no blood on my hands.
You look a bit tired.
You don't cease to be a husband. You don't cease to be a father.
He wore his heart on his sleeve, most memorably when he discovered his daughter Roslyn and her partner had a heroin problem.
Like any father, I love my daughter. I trust her.
That, I think, was what was so difficult for Bob, to just not be able to, if you like, absorb that shock properly or do the grieving about that shock. It was sitting there like a lump.
With him through it all was his loyal wife and mother to their children, Hazel Hawke. She had weathered being married to a man who was often a workaholic with a wandering eye. But Susan Ryan says that his reputation as a ladies' man should not be confused with sexism. Ryan was Australia's first female minister appointed by Hawke, who at the ACTU had championed equal pay for women.
It was then a great relief as a young woman, a feminist with very clear feminist objectives in all the work I did, to work with a man who was relaxed about women. See, with Bob, he never worried about women because he knew he was better than anyone else, and that included all women.
In a confidential agreement, Hawke had pledged to step aside from the top job by 1990 in favour of his ambitious treasurer. When that deadline passed, with Hawke showing no sign of bowing out, Keating launched a challenge and eventually toppled the Prime Minister in 1991. The dumping of Hawke led to a bitter rift between Hawke and Keating, which lasted years.
The circumstances were upsetting, but looking back on it, one of the enormous pluses of the end of my prime ministership was that it led to the situation where I married Blanche.
After he left the top office, Bob Hawke ended his rocky marriage with Hazel Hawke, who sadly later died after a battle with Alzheimer's disease. He resumed his relationship with his biographer and former lover, Blanche Delpuget. They married in 1995.
And that has been, just an indescribable joy in my life.
The boy from border town became a successful businessman with a harbourside mansion to show for it. He didn't lose his sense of humour and from time to time enjoyed the odd cold beer.
They're going skull, skull, skull. And the great man Bobby Hawke nailed it.
Still Labor to his bootstraps in his 80s, he wowed the comrades at the ACTU National Conference in 2012.
So here we go.
He campaigned for his ALP successors.
Help Bill Shorten and Labor stand up to protect Medicare.
This Medicare scare campaign raised the ire of the coalition, but in it, Bob Hawke helped almost tilt Malcolm Turnbull out of office.
Right till the end, he's packed a political punch.
Bob Hawke, ladies and gentlemen.
In whatever way you can, try and help those around you. This is both the right and the good thing to do, and also it'll make your own life more satisfying.
I always smile when I think of him because he was always, twinkling and laughing. I think he was like a great burst of sunshine on the Australian political scene, and easy to like, easy to get on with, but with such a brain and such determination that he changed Australia for the better, and we should all really thank our lucky stars that he's been part of our lives.
I have two statements here from which I'd like to read. The first is from the former Australian Prime Minister, Paul Keating. He writes, "With Bob Hawke's passing today, the great partnership I enjoyed with him passes too, a partnership we forged with the Australian people. But what remains and what will endure from that partnership are the monumental foundations of modern Australia." Bob possessed a moral framework for his important public life, both representing the workers of Australia and more broadly the country at large. He understood that imagination was central to policy making and never lacked the courage to do what had to be done to turn that imagination into reality. The country is much the poorer for Bob Hawke's passing. The The second statement is from Mr Hawke's wife, Blanche Delperge. She writes, among his proudest achievements were large increases in the proportion of children finishing high school, his role in ending apartheid in South Africa, and his successful international campaign to protect Antarctica from mining. He abhorred racism and bigotry. His father, the Reverend Clem Hawke, told Bob that if you believed in the fatherhood of God, then you must also believe in the brotherhood of man. Bob would today add the sisterhood of women. Bob was dearly loved by his family and so many friends and colleagues. We will miss him. The golden bowl is broken. You can switch to ABC News Channel for continuing coverage of Bob Hawke's life and legacy. Please join me tomorrow. The election campaign goes on for a special election eve edition of 7:30 with expert analysis from Laura Tingle, Annabelle Crabb and Barry Cassidy. Until then, good night.